These are foods that are made because the government helps support these commodity crops, which are 60% of our calories. The people who consume them the most are the sickest. Globally, it kills 11 million people a year. That's like a Holocaust every single year, people dying from eating the wrong foods and not eating the right foods. And it's because our whole agricultural system has been moved to make those foods which are causing heart disease, diabetes, cancer, dementia, obviously obesity.
I'm Dave Rubin, and this is the Rubin Report. And joining me today is a doctor who is a leader in the field of functional medicine, as well as a 13-time New York Times Bestselling Author. And his newest book is Food Fix: How to Save Our Health, Our Economy, Our Communities, and Our Planet, one bite at a time. Dr. Mark Hyman, welcome to the Rubin Report.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
I think that was my longest intro ever. This is a serious...
You got it updated, because that book just hit the list yesterday. So
yeah, I'm doing this on the fly, man. You can see as I edited it right there. It said 12 on the prompter there. I'm super psyched to talk to you because as I just said to you before we started, getting away a little bit from politics is always a nice break for me.
Yes.
But this is not purely away from politics. So we're going to do a little of that.
Food is probably the most political issue of our time, even though we don't talk about it that way.
Yeah, and quite literally, you bit off a lot in this title because you talk about economics and communities and the planet and all of those things, and how it's related. So before we get into any of that stuff, how did you get into this field? What made you care about all of this stuff? Where did it all come from?
That's great. Well, I've always been interested in health and nutrition. I grew up in Spain. My parents lived there for 11 years after the war. They missed the whole junk food, fast food, processed food revolution in America, and I always grew up eating real whole food. And in college, I lived with a guy who was a nutrition PhD student, and he introduced me to this whole idea about nutrition against disease. And I became a yoga teacher before I was a doctor. Then I became a doctor and kind of got indoctrinated, literally, and became very focused on traditional good medicine. But I realized the limits of it, and I then got sick myself and ended up having to fix myself using functional medicine, which is looking at systems, looking at root causes. And after 30 years of sitting in my office seeing chronically ill patients, which by the way is 6 out of 10 Americans have a chronic disease that kills 11 million people a year from food, I realized that food was causing my patients to be sick, and that I had to look at why they were eating the food they were eating. And then I thought, well, it's the food system. And I'm like, well, why do we have the food system? It's our food policies. And then why do we have our policies? It's because of the food industry influence driving our policies. And some of it's legacy from good intentions that we still have from policies 50 to 70 years ago. So it occurred to me that if I really want to cure my patients, I have to step back and look at the big picture of what's wrong with our food system, the impact it's causing on disease, on our economy, on social justice issues, poverty, mental health, kids' academic performance, national security, environment, climate. It's all one problem that is predominantly driven by our food and our food system, and it's fixable. If food is the cause, it's also the cure.
And that's exactly what this book is about.
It's called Food Fix, not Food Apocalypse.
So we'll see about that. Give me another 50 minutes here. I had your buddy Max Lugavere on recently.
I do.
And he was also talking about how regular Western medicine, when his mom got sick, they did not have enough answers, or it was, as he calls it, diagnose and adios. You just referenced something there about indoctrination and relative to Western medicine and how they don't really talk about food. Can you explore that a little bit?
Yeah, Wendenberry says, the food system produces food with paying no attention to health, and the healthcare system treats disease with no attention to food. And I think food is the biggest driver of chronic disease. It's something that I've learned as a functional medicine doctor, that food is medicine and can heal, but it also can harm. And so that's really why I wrote this book, was to sort of help our country and hopefully our global population understand that if we want to deal with some of the biggest crises we're facing today in America and globally, we have to focus on the food system. It's the most invisible cause. There's no real conversation about it in the political discourse, and yet it's probably the biggest political issue of our time.
So since we're having the conversation right now, what are some of just like the basic things we should know about the foods we're eating and what we're being force-fed that we shouldn't eat, and maybe some things that we should be incorporating more, all that
Exactly.
stuff.
So how we grow food, from the seed to how we produce food and process food, to how we eat it, and how we waste it is driving so much of our issues. So the food we're producing predominantly today is what we call ultra-processed calories or ultra-processed food. What is that? It's food made from a few simple ingredients: refined white flour, high fructose corn syrup and other corn additives and ingredients, and refined soybean oil that are turned into literally hundreds of thousands of processed foods that are all made from the same ingredients that are different colors, sizes, and shapes of food-like extruded substances.
Yeah.
And the frightening thing is the data
They're
is,
not fresh. That's what you're telling me.
well, they're not
for the most
fresh.
part,
They're,
right?
they're ingredients that you might even recognize. If you cover the front of a Pop-Tart or a corn dog of the box, you probably could barely tell the difference in the ingredients, right? And these are foods that are made because the government helps support these commodity crops, which are 60% of our calories. The people who consume them the most are the sickest. Globally, it kills 11 million people a year. That's like a Holocaust every single year of people dying from eating the wrong foods and not eating the right foods. And it's because our whole agricultural system has been moved to make those foods, which are causing heart disease, diabetes, cancer, dementia, obviously obesity, and it's frightening to me. And when I was born, there were 5% of Americans who were obese. When I graduated medical school, it was less than 20%. There was not a single state that had an obesity rate over 20%. Now, it's 42%, and most states have obesity rates over 40%. That's 42% of Americans are obese, 75% overweight. It's going to be 1 in 2 people in 10 years that will be obese, not just overweight. And this is crippling our economy. We now have $1 in $3 in Medicare is spent for diabetes alone. Our entire chronic disease epidemic, 80% of Medicare costs are from chronic disease. We have 1 in 3 federal dollars that are spent on Medicare. Soon it will be 1 in 2. I mean, Medicare for our company would be the biggest company in the world with a $1.3 trillion a year budget.
Wow.
And
Wow.
a lot of that is unnecessary. 80% of that is unnecessary, is caused by the food and the food system.
So you mentioned the way our policies going back decades sort of led to some of this. Is there like a moment?
Yeah,
Is there a
so
moment
here's
there?
what happened. You know, nobody was like a big cabal of evil food companies that got together.
Well,
and
because I
said,
think that, I'm glad you started with that, because I think that's what people think, that it's
No.
all, it's like these evil companies or the evil government that
no,
sit
no,
down and
no,
how do we screw over the most amount of people?
It's the unintended consequences of good intentions, right? So after the World War II, there was a lot of hunger in the world. There was a need to produce a lot of starchy calories, which we thought were good sources of carbohydrates and energy to fuel a growing population. And so industrial agriculture came onto the scene with, you know, mass mechanization, with intensive use of fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, which no one knew were bad at the time. I mean, Silent Spring was written in the 60s by Rachel Carson, which exposed the harm of DDT and pesticides. That wasn't eliminated until the 70s. And we didn't know that fertilizer was destroying oceans and lakes and rivers and killing, you know, hundreds of thousands of tons of fish every year in the Gulf of
Did really
Mexico.
nobody know? I mean, it's,
Nobody. No,
yeah,
I don't believe that people really said, "Oh, these pesticides are going to kill people. We're going to use them anyway," or that glyphosate is going to cause cancer and destroy our microbiome. And
You think these companies, they really
Yeah.
they thought they had answers to
yeah,
these
of course,
things
and
with
we
the
need to
limited
create
science.
a food for a growing population. But then people started to understand these things, and then the cat was out of the bag, and they didn't want to lose the business and the profitability of growing food in this way.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about lifestyles instead of nonstop yelling, check out our lifestyle playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, check out our full episode playlist. They're both right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.